fractal noise. More like, yeah, I'll be honest, I don't have a good joke for the opening. My bad, y'all. Hello, and welcome back to A2A Book Reviews. Now, I recently got done reading one of Christopher Paolini's new books. You know, the guy of Eragon and the Inheritance Cycle fame. And now, I have some thoughts, but if you take a look at the markings, there's not a lot of that. But in case you don't know about Paolini, let's talk about him real quick. Christopher Paolini was born in 1983 and released the best-selling book Eragon in 2002. He started working on Eragon at the age of 15 and was incredibly successful, leading to Paolini becoming a New York Times best-selling author at the age of 19, which is incredibly impressive, and I am incredibly jealous. I'm pretty sure he even has a Guinness Book of World Records for that. He followed up Eragon with 3 more installments of the main series, 2 spin-offs, I Hit My Microphone, at a much later date, including one just 2 years ago. And in 2020, debuted a new series called the Fractalverse, with the first novel being To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, a very poetic name, now focusing on science fiction for a more adult audience as opposed to his claim to fame, which was fantasy for young adults. Eragon even received a movie adaptation, which sucked so incredibly bad it's still made fun of to this day, and is one of the main reasons people think book-to-movie adaptations are doomed to failure. And as someone who has watched the movie, that is not at all an unfair interpretation. Recently, however, it was said that Paolini himself was helping to write a new TV show based on the books, so hopefully this will be significantly better. If it's not, it's so over for Inheritance Cycle fans. I promise I will review the Inheritance Cycle someday. I really do plan on it, as I still consider them to be some of my favorite books of all time. I just need to get around to it. Which, well, if you've seen my reading list, that may be a while. But in the meantime, if you're interested, a link to his own website will be available in the description below, where you can see all of his books. Though I would honestly recommend To Sleep in a Sea of Stars first, as I enjoyed it even more. But I understand that is not necessarily a popular opinion. Speaking of To Sleep, this book I have here is a prequel to it in the same Fractalverse. Let's get into it. You know, I quite liked it. Fractal Noise by Christopher Paolini. And yeah, this book was very controversial during its making and publication, and that controversy was completely justified. I'd go so far as to say there wasn't enough outrage. The controversy being that the cover image was almost completely AI generated. Pretty much the only change was recoloration and a few very minor touch-ups. The pictures side by side are available now, here, and thereabouts. Look for yourself. Moreover, the publishing company, Tor, when called out for this absolute dog water decision, remained fatuous and said that, oh well, they were going to go through with the cover anyway, and in fact, couldn't even rule out using more AI-generated images for books in the future. Paolini himself is almost guaranteed to have approved the cover image, but his knowledge of its origins is more doubtful. Nevertheless, when made assuredly aware, he didn't exactly denounce it, instead saying that the book would probably have to be delayed another year if it were to be changed. In case you can't tell, I'm not exactly a fan of the use of generative AI in professional settings, much less on something as prestigious as one of the most famous contemporary authors' new book. Truly, the endless drive for the bottom line will be the death of art. However, despite this deserving far more backlash than it received, I will still be covering the book on its merits alone. As a reviewer on Goodreads aptly put it, the site is called Goodreads, not Good Covers. Similarly, this is A2A Book Reviews, not A2A Cover Reviews. The consideration of art on its own worth is independent of the consideration of art holistically. Which one is more important is ultimately something for you to decide, but you cannot equivocate them. All that said, it's a good book. Of course, making the controversy even more saddening. Honestly, that's the majority of what there is to say about it. I certainly didn't make a lot of notes within the book itself. To be sure, I wouldn't call any of it bad, but none of it exceptional. The book, serving as a prequel to Paolini's To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, which when I read it I immediately loved, follows a crew looking at alien planets for potential colonization, wherein they discover this massive, perfectly smooth and round hole emitting EMPs that are signaling the Mandelbrot set at 180 decibels. Literally, fractal noise. They go investigate, and the journey is absolutely horrific, not to mention each of the 4 people on the ground being cantankerous themselves. Something that was really fun and a quite creative inclusion was the endless thuds that punctuate dramatic moments. Maybe I shouldn't have punched that hard. These are the thuds emanating from the beacon, and are always around, but the author utilizes them to great effect, distinctly separating other parts of the writing and emphasizing plot beats, drama, and the incessant battle against the planet as they make their way across it. Additionally, towards the end of the book, as the characters get physically closer, the thuds become more dramatic in the text itself, first becoming capitalized when they were previously not, then bold instead of italicized, and growing in size until they weren't even recognizable as thuds. A solid literary touch that makes the book stand out and feel far more pressing and impactful, literally, than it otherwise would have. The rest of it is largely, well, formulaic, corporate. Some people have even drawn parallels to the cover controversy. I don't think that's the case, but the writing is polished to the point of lacking most individuality. It doesn't preclude it being good, of course. For example, the opening is very attention-grabbing, a great hook, and the opening deductive analysis on the whole is beautiful. I'll read it out, the bottom of page 9 and the top of page 10. Alex swallowed as he stared in the center of the abyss. It was too large, too perfectly symmetrical. Even with all the advances of the past few hundred years, he didn't think humans could make a hole like that. They just didn't have enough spare time or energy. And for what? Perfection implied seriousness of purpose, and there were only a few purposes that seemed likely. To pursue scientific research, to help fend off some existential threat, to fulfill a religious need, or to serve as a piece of art. The last two options were the most frightening. Any species that could afford to expend that amount of resources on what amounted to a non-essential project would be able to destroy every human settlement with ease, Earth included. Perfection, then, was a warning to heed. Stuff like that is usually important for writing compellingly, a simple concept and deducting plausible aphorisms from it. But I can't escape the book's corporate lens. The writing is good, some lines are especially good, like suffering was its own form of absolution. It's still writing you've seen in every other best-selling sci-fi novel. It's still writing you see plastered on the Barnes & Noble front page, writing you find most career authors with contracts with large publishing companies in the world. The syntax isn't laconic, but it isn't going to surprise you. The verbiage isn't necessarily mundane. To be fair, it was in this book that I first heard, to my recollection, the word lambent in any context outside of Gears of War, and credit where credit is due, whoever named them in those games was spot on. But for most of us, we won't be finding new words. And yeah, it's not like I'm going out of my comfort zone much here either, but I have 30 subscribers, and Paolini is worth $25 million. There was what I would call an over-reliance on short sentences and loose paragraphs. The most common form of pacing change is between relatively simple multi-word sentences and single or few-word sentences. That and most paragraphs are 1-2 sentences each. It reads fast, but it reads corporate. Now, to be fair, Paolini is likely one of the most influential contemporary authors out there, especially for fantasy, which of course bleeds heavily into sci-fi. To a non-insignificant extent, he wrote the formula. But that doesn't give him a blanket pass to follow it. Its brevity likely contributes to how little there is to say. It's only, 257 pages, excluding the afterword and appendix. Standard hardcover dimensions for my copy took a few hours to read, and that leaves less time for it to sink in properly. And I'm sure it will sink in. The ending specifically, I'll probably be thinking about for a good while in the future, especially one of its last messages, that the abstract changes when it becomes concrete, that the world is different reified. Let's apply that here. It's one thing to hear me ramble on about how it's corporate and overly polished and brief in its sentences and paragraphs and all that jazz. It's another thing entirely to read it yourself. So do that, because I don't have a ending notes section because I forgot to write that and instead incorporated it into everything else. So this is the final thoughts. Personally, I'd give the book a nice and cozy, if not exceptional, 7 out of 10. I'd love to hear what you end up on. But until then, this has been H2A Book Reviews. Never stop reading.